This is the crazy thing about it.
Yeah.
It's all of the above, right?
Okay.
You have inflation, then the Fed's going to basically push us into a recession that they can't bail us out. And remember, since 2009, the Fed has just been printing us out of every trouble. Whether it was, you remember obviously 2009, the collapse in the banking sector,
Yeah.
all the bailouts that went on and the quantitative easing that was started. Right. And then that basically continued. Then in 2018, we saw them say, okay, we got to start raising rates. The market threw this big hissy fit, dropped 20% in a matter of 6 weeks. They actually reversed and started cutting rates again. And then it takes you into COVID, and we know what happened during the COVID crisis with them printing even more money. And that was the massive printing of money that we saw.
Yeah.
And so it's really everything. It's the inflation numbers, it's the economy that's going to be slowing, and it's also just the overall kind of wear and tear that it does on the consumer.
Well, on the
Health effect, right? It's
Yeah.
everything to do with 401ks that when the Fed talks the market down, and remember the Fed has done that, right? They see the market rallying and they'll say, hey, listen, we're going to be more hawkish, and the market sells off. They don't want the stock market to be up to all-time highs because it creates this wealth effect where people say, hey, look at my 401k, it's worth X amount, I can go buy that new car now. And same thing with home prices. Your home, you bought it last year, you already made 100K on it, and it created this wealth effect. So it's all tied into this inflation that's going on. And I do absolutely think that this is one of the things the Fed needed to pop these bubbles. Now the question is, can the Fed control the collapse? In history, they haven't done a great job of it. I'm doubtful that they can again.
Okay.
I do think it is, and it actually could be worse. So I do think at least a minimum of 10 to 15 years. I want to show you some really cool charts here. So
let's take a look at the charts.
Here's the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and I'm going to show you guys why I'm showing this chart. So take a look at what we have here. You have this sort of pattern, which is basically this M pattern top in 1915 to looks like right around 1921. All right, and again, you're going to say, well, why the heck is Gareth going back to this period? And then look at the run that the Dow Jones Industrial Average had for the next, basically in the roaring 20s to obviously the Great Depression, the collapse, the crash of 29. And so if you look at that, and now let's just go right to the S&P 500. And this is where it gets crazy, right? So what we can see is that same sort of pattern formation from the dot-com bubble, the dot-com collapse, the real estate bubble, the real estate collapse, and then look at the massive run we've had. Now, a lot of people would say, okay, that's just a chart. It's just, it's a coincidence. But what you have to do is you have to delve deeper. And this is where I love being a student of history. And what you do is you look at what was going on in the early 1900s, 1915, 1920s. And what was happening was cars were becoming more and more the norm. Electricity was becoming more and more the norm. Well, what did that give us? It gave the consumer light at night. They could go out at night. They could go to speakeasies, spend money. They could drive more than, before cars, you were limited to the distance you could go if you wanted to go to the general store, right? And so you had all these things coming into play that created a consumer that could get out there and spend money. Then look at what the lending stuff was in the 20s. There was lending policies that are very similar to a lot of the lending stuff that we're seeing. Now, if we go to the current times in the S&P 500, in the dot-com era, what do we know happened? The internet emerged, right? And the internet basically gave, do you shop on Amazon?
I do.
Well, so do I. And think about that. Now you didn't even have to leave your house to shop and spend money. And so there's these coordinated factors that make me think that we're very similar to what happened in the teens to the 20s leading into the into the Great Depression. And I don't want to, it's hard for me not to jump to that conclusion, but I am very concerned that we could see something like that occur.
We're about to jump.
The chart, if you look at this chart, look at the S&P run.
Yeah.
And then if we flip over to the run from the 20s, we're at the end of the roaring 20s.
Okay, we're running towards the end. We're running out of steam.
The same sort of movement is there.
Well, we're only going to
Let's say housing prices drop 20, 30%. Let's say your 401ks, let's say the stock market goes down 50%. Now let's take it a step further and say the Federal Reserve will not be coming in to print money because if inflation, let's say, is at 4 or 5%, how do they print trillions of dollars with the risk of inflation jumping to 20 or 25%? We don't want to be Venezuela. We don't want to be some of these countries where you have this kind of crazy inflation. So the question is, how do we get out of the next recession? And that's the question. I don't have the answer for that. We might just have to pay the piper at this point. I think we're in at least a recession for the next 3 years. And I think it starts in 2023. I don't know if it'll start in the first half of 2023, but I think
nobody knows when.
Yeah,
it's
this is
gonna
just
end,
again.
But we want to
me-
hear your rationale.
Yeah, my rationale is that again, the market is going to have to pay the piper in that we have always, for now, in recent history, in fact, there are so many investors in the market that have never known a true market. It's always been a market that has been bailed out by the Federal Reserve. You take that gentle holding hand away, and now the market's going to fall flat on its face. The economy's going to fall flat on its face. And so my thinking is that it'll take 2 to 3 years for us to get in such a bad recession that the Fed actually has to start printing money again.
Okay.
And that should help us get out of it.